I never thought I'd be nervous around my girlfriend's mom, until she looked at me and said, "I didn't raise her to deserve you." The first time I met her, I wasn't sure if I should be nervous or awed. My girlfriend's mom, let's just call her Claire for clarity, had this presence that quietly commanded attention without trying. She was in her early 40s, confident, elegant, and somehow warm in a way that made the room feel softer. I remember standing in the doorway, trying to seem casual while my heart betrayed me with a slight quickening of its rhythm. She smiled when she saw me, a small, knowing curve of her lips that seemed to measure me and then relax. There was something in the calm way she moved, the smooth tilt of her head, the way her fingers adjusted a loose strand of hair behind her ear, that made me unconsciously mirror her movements. I noticed the subtle perfume she wore, floral, understated, like spring mornings wrapped in sunlight. We started with polite greetings. She shook my hand, firm but not stiff, and for a moment, our fingers lingered in that handshake a fraction longer than necessary. I felt an odd warmth spreading from that simple contact, though I couldn't explain why. It was like she was silently testing me, and in the same instant, letting me know that she'd already decided I wasn't a threat. We moved into the living room. Sunlight poured through the wide windows, pooling on the soft carpet and warming the room like a gentle embrace. Claire poured tea into delicate cups, the faint clink of porcelain filling the quiet spaces between our tentative conversation. I noticed the ease with which she handled the task. No rush, no unnecessary motion. Every gesture deliberate, graceful. Even the way she tilted the cup before offering it to me felt intimate in a strangely platonic, entirely respectful way. Her eyes caught mine once or twice, and each time I felt a curious mix of nervousness and something else. Recognition, understanding. It was impossible to name the feeling, but it lingered in my chest long after I looked away. I could hear my own heartbeat, almost louder than her voice when she asked a casual question about my studies. The words themselves weren't extraordinary, but the weight behind them, that she was genuinely listening, made me feel seen. For a moment, I caught myself staring, and she didn't flinch or move away. Instead, she offered a faint, teasing smile, as though she had caught me in a private thought but wasn't going to punish me for it. It was only then that I realized. There was a subtle tension in the air, quiet and unspoken, as though the room itself recognized the unusual connection forming in these first few minutes. By the time I left that day, I wasn't thinking about my girlfriend at all. My mind was consumed by Claire, by the warmth in her eyes, the soft grace of her movements, and the strange, silent pull I felt toward her. I didn't understand it yet, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. All I knew was that meeting her had shifted something in me, subtly but irrevocably, and I had a feeling that every next encounter would matter far more than I ever expected. After that first encounter, I couldn't stop noticing her. Claire, my girlfriend's mom, seemed to linger in my thoughts in a way I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't overt or inappropriate. It was subtle, the kind of attention that crept in when you weren't looking. I found myself watching her from across the room during family dinners, noticing the small things that made her her. She had this way of laughing that felt effortless, natural, and oddly infectious. Not the laugh that fills a room with noise, but the quiet, genuine kind that made everyone around her feel lighter. And she often looked at me when she laughed, not mockingly, but as if she were quietly inviting me into her world. It made me self-conscious, but in a way that wasn't uncomfortable, more like being caught in the warmth of the sun without realizing you were standing there. It wasn't just her laughter. I noticed the little gestures. How she brushed crumbs off the counter with an elegant flick of her hand. How she poured wine for my girlfriend with care. How she absent-mindedly played with a pendant on her necklace when she was deep in thought. Every detail hinted at a life lived fully. A combination of confidence, experience, and gentle attentiveness. It was magnetic, though I had to fight myself not to linger too obviously. One evening, we were in the kitchen together while she helped my girlfriend prepare a snack. I caught a glimpse of her from the side, the soft curve of her cheek, the smooth grace of her hands as they worked, the warmth of her presence filling the small room. My heart stuttered for a fraction of a second when our hands brushed while passing the cutting board. She barely flinched, her eyes meeting mine for a heartbeat before returning to her task. But I could feel the electricity of that contact lingering far longer than it should have. I began to observe her quietly, noticing patterns in her behavior, the subtleties in her expressions. She seemed to care deeply for everyone around her. Yet there was an unmistakable hint of something private in her gaze, a layer of vulnerability beneath the poised exterior. I couldn't help but wonder what stories she carried, what she had learned in her 42 years that shaped the way she moved through the world. And in the quiet moments when she wasn't speaking to anyone else, I found myself imagining what it would feel like to just talk to her, to sit with her without the social constraints of family dynamics. There was an unspoken curiosity, a pull that I didn't fully understand but didn't want to resist. It was emotional, not physical, a fascination with the depth and warmth she radiated. By the end of that week, I realized something that unsettled me slightly. I was drawn to her, not in a way that demanded action, but in a way that demanded acknowledgement. She had entered my mental space, quietly, subtly, like a melody you hear in passing and can't shake. And I knew that our next encounter would be charged, not with words, but with the quiet, invisible tension of shared attention. It happened quietly, almost imperceptibly, one rainy afternoon. The world outside blurred under a soft drizzle, tapping gently against the windows, while the house smelled faintly of brewed coffee and warm pastries. I had come over to visit my girlfriend, but somehow, I found myself alone with Claire in the kitchen. Not intentionally. Just a few missed footsteps, a distracted conversation, and suddenly, the room shrank around us in a way that made every sound, every gesture, feel amplified. She noticed my tension immediately. Claire always noticed. The way my shoulders stiffened, the subtle frown I didn't even realize I wore, the way my hands fiddled nervously with the edge of a napkin. All of it registered in her calm, observant gaze. "You've had a rough day," she said softly, not accusatory, just matter of fact, like stating a weather condition. I hesitated, unsure if I should admit it. But there was something in her eyes, something that invited honesty, a quiet trust one hadn't expected to feel with someone I barely knew. I confessed a minor frustration, something personal, something that had weighed on me all week. It was a small thing, but the act of speaking it aloud made it feel significant. She listened, truly listened. No interruptions, no judgments, just the soft tilt of her head, the faint, empathetic smile that told me she understood more than I could say. And then she shared something of herself. A story about a mistake she had made years ago, the embarrassment and lessons it brought, and the way she had learned to forgive herself over time. Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor of vulnerability woven through it, a quiet honesty that made my chest tighten. I realized then that this wasn't just a casual conversation. It was a window, a rare glimpse into the parts of her life that she didn't show the world. And somehow, in that moment, she was trusting me with it. My usual nerves and hesitation fell away, replaced by a deep sense of respect and a strange, inexplicable connection. As she spoke, I noticed the small details around us. The way her fingers rested on the counter, relaxed but deliberate. The soft rustle of her sweater as she leaned slightly forward. The faint scent of her perfume mingling with the aroma of coffee. Even the quiet patter of rain against the window seemed to punctuate her words, framing the intimacy of the moment like a scene crafted for no one but the two of us. Without thinking, our hands brushed while I reached for the sugar bowl. A subtle contact, fleeting and unremarkable to anyone else, but in that space it was charged. Neither of us moved away. Neither of us pulled back. It was a silent acknowledgement of the closeness growing between us, tempered by restraint but undeniably present. By the time I left that day, I was aware of a shift. Claire had shown me a side of herself that few ever saw, and in return, I had opened a part of myself I usually kept hidden. The unspoken tension between us had evolved into something more. An emotional intimacy, fragile yet profound, that neither of us could ignore. And I knew, even then, that every future encounter would carry the memory of this one. The day our walls fell away, if only for a little while. After a few more visits, the atmosphere between Claire and me began to shift. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A flicker in her eyes, the gentle tilt of her head when she laughed at something I said. But over time, her teasing became deliberate, playful, and undeniably personal. It wasn't flirtation in the overt sense. It was the kind that lingered in the air, leaving a warmth that hummed beneath the surface. It started during a lazy Saturday afternoon when we were all in the living room. My girlfriend had stepped out to take a call, and I found myself sitting next to Claire on the sofa, our knees brushing ever so slightly. She noticed my awkward shift and gave me a small, sly smile. "You know," she said lightly, "if you keep staring at me like that, I'll start charging rent for occupying my thoughts." I laughed, cheeks warming, not just at the joke but at the ease of her delivery. There was an intimacy in her humor, a way of speaking that made it feel like she was letting me in on a secret I wasn't supposed to have yet. I felt the pull of her presence more strongly than before, a quiet gravity that made me hyper-aware of every movement, every fleeting contact. Her teasing continued in small, unexpected ways. A playful critique of how I poured my coffee, a joking observation about my habit of leaving books scattered, or a gentle nudge when I reached for something on the counter. Each gesture was light-hearted, but beneath it lingered a subtle tension, the kind that makes the heart beat faster without any dramatic revelation. I caught myself wanting to impress her, to respond with humor or charm, and I realized how rare it was for me to feel that way about anyone. The sensory details of these moments became etched in my memory. The soft sunlight spilling across the room, casting golden hues over the coffee table. The faint scent of her perfume, mingling with the aroma of fresh pastries. The warmth of her hand grazing mine when passing an item, just long enough to feel the connection but brief enough to leave both of us guessing. Even the gentle hum of the refrigerator seemed to underscore the rhythm of our interaction, marking each pause and glance with quiet significance. I noticed, too, that she seemed to enjoy this playful tension as much as I did. Her eyes would sparkle when she caught me off guard, and she never stepped back when our shoulders brushed. There was an unspoken acknowledgement in the space between us, a shared awareness of something neither of us wanted to name aloud. By the end of that day, I understood that our dynamic had evolved. What began as quiet curiosity and admiration had grown into a delicate dance of attention and restraint. We were learning each other's rhythms, testing boundaries with humor, and deepening a connection that was as emotional as it was magnetic. The teasing wasn't just about jokes or small annoyances. It was a way of exploring a closeness that neither of us had anticipated but neither could deny. And in the quiet moments, when our laughter faded and the room grew still, I felt it, the tension between us, unspoken yet undeniable. A tension that whispered of emotions waiting to be explored, of possibilities hovering on the edge of awareness. It was one of those quiet evenings when the world outside seemed to pause. The sky was streaked with muted orange and soft violet, the kind of fading light that makes everything feel suspended in time. I was sitting in the living room, absently thumbing through a magazine, when Claire entered. Her presence shifted the air around me. Calm yet charged, familiar yet impossibly magnetic. We ended up in the kitchen, ostensibly to get a glass of water, but as usual, our conversation drifted toward the personal. There was an unspoken understanding now. The playful teasing and shared laughter had softened into something more serious, more intimate. She leaned against the counter, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp, as if she were studying the very depths of my thoughts. And then she said it, not abruptly, but with a quiet intensity that made me stop mid-thought. "I didn't raise her to deserve you." The words hung in the air, layered with meaning. On the surface, they sounded protective, a mother guarding her daughter. But beneath that, there was something else. Acknowledgement, perhaps even admiration, directed at me. My chest tightened. My fingers curled around the glass I was holding, suddenly aware of every small motion, every shallow breath. I didn't know what to say at first. The tension between us was delicate, like a thread stretched taut. My voice came out softer than intended. I respect her, and I respect you too." My words sounded inadequate even to my own ears, but it was the truth. Every glance, Every interaction up to this point had led to this silent acknowledgement of connection, and I didn't want to overstep, but I couldn't remain silent either. She tilted her head slightly, the corner of her lips lifting in a fleeting, enigmatic smile. "I can see that," she said softly. "But it's more than respect, isn't it?" Her words hung between us like a delicate invitation. I swallowed, aware of the subtle warmth radiating from her, the soft perfume mingling with the scent of freshly brewed coffee in the kitchen. Our hands brushed briefly as I handed her a towel, a fleeting touch that seemed to linger far longer than it should have. In that suspended moment, I realized the complexity of our emotions. There was admiration, yes, and a silent pull toward her, tempered by respect and restraint. There was care, protection, and a deep, unspoken understanding that we were both navigating something delicate, something that didn't need to be named aloud to be real. She looked at me then, her eyes holding a mixture of vulnerability and strength, and I felt a connection that went beyond words. It was a quiet confession, mutual yet unspoken, layered in subtlety and restraint. The air around us vibrated with the acknowledgement of feelings neither of us could fully express, but both of us understood. By the time the conversation ended, we returned to the living room, side by side but careful to respect boundaries. Yet, everything had shifted. The tension, the warmth, the quiet magnetic pull. It was now undeniable. And though neither of us crossed the line, the emotional intimacy between us had deepened irreversibly, leaving a mark that would linger in every glance, every touch, every shared silence from that moment onward. After that evening, a strange stillness settled between Claire and me. It wasn't awkward, exactly. More like the pause after a profound note in a song, where everything resonates and lingers in the chest. The playful teasing and quiet laughter that had filled our previous encounters had given way to something heavier, more nuanced. I found myself reflecting on every glance, every subtle touch, every unspoken word. I realized that I was walking a tightrope between admiration and desire, between respect and the temptation to lean further into this growing connection. Each time I saw her, my mind raced, cataloging moments. The way her hand brushed against mine, the gentle warmth in her eyes, the soft exhale she released when she relaxed her shoulders in conversation. I caught myself imagining scenarios where I could be closer, physically, emotionally, and then chastising myself for the audacity of those thoughts. She seemed to sense it too. Claire moved with her usual poise, graceful and assured, but there were subtle hints in her body language that mirrored my hesitation. She would pause slightly before speaking, her gaze lingering a fraction longer than necessary, a hand brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear just as my eyes wandered toward her face. There was an unspoken rhythm developing between us, a careful push and pull that neither of us named, but both of us felt. One afternoon, while helping my girlfriend set the table, I found myself alone with Claire again, a rare quiet moment. We spoke about mundane things at first, the weather, a recipe, an upcoming family event, but our conversation slowly drifted toward deeper topics. I watched her closely, noticing the subtle lines around her eyes that hinted at both laughter and worry, the way her lips pressed together slightly when she considered her words. It struck me how much life experience she carried in the small details of her gestures. We didn't touch directly, not overtly, but there were small, intimate moments. Our hands almost brushing as we passed dishes, shoulders lightly grazing when we stood close, our laughter blending in the soft hum of the kitchen. These fleeting touches carried weight, unspoken acknowledgement of the bond that had grown between us. It was gentle, restrained, but undeniably charged with emotion. By the time my girlfriend returned, I had a clearer understanding of what we shared. There was affection, yes, but it was layered with hesitation, reflection, and mutual respect. Neither of us was ready to speak the words aloud, yet both of us recognized the significance of every glance, every pause, every shared smile. As I left that day, I felt a mix of longing and serenity. The connection between Claire and me had evolved beyond playful curiosity into something quiet, meaningful, and deeply human. It wasn't about crossing boundaries. It was about understanding them, acknowledging the unspoken, and cherishing the intimacy that existed within those boundaries. And I knew that our next encounter would carry the weight of this understanding, the tension of restrained emotion, and the warmth of mutual recognition that neither of us could ignore. It was quiet that evening, the kind of stillness that allows every small sound to resonate. The sky outside had melted into deep indigo, sprinkled with the first hints of stars, and the house smelled faintly of baked bread and lingering coffee. I had come over to see my girlfriend, but somehow, as always, I ended up in conversation with Claire, sitting across from her in the living room where the golden light of a single lamp softened every shadow. There was no need for teasing tonight. The laughter had softened into gentle smiles, and the playful tension had evolved into a quiet understanding. We spoke softly, about nothing and everything. Life, regrets, joys, and small hopes for the future. Every sentence was punctuated by subtle gestures, her hand brushing against the edge of a table, my knee almost touching hers as we shifted, the fleeting warmth of our hands passing objects back and forth. It was intimate, yet safe, magnetic, yet restrained. At one point, she paused, looking at me with a mixture of vulnerability and strength. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, her voice low enough that only I could hear, "about all of this about us." She didn't elaborate, but the weight of those words filled the room. I understood. She wasn't speaking of romance in the conventional sense, not openly, but of connection, trust, and the acknowledgement of feelings that had quietly grown over months. I took a breath, letting the words I couldn't speak settle between us. Instead, I reached out, just slightly, and let my hand rest near hers on the arm of the sofa. She didn't move away. She let it linger, and in that simple contact, more than words could convey passed between us. Respect, affection, understanding, and a shared acknowledgement of what had formed between us. We didn't need to define it. The story of our connection was already written in these small moments. The lingering glances, the shared laughter, the gentle touches that had marked our time together. The tension that had once hummed beneath the surface had softened into warmth, a quiet intimacy that was safe, meaningful, and profoundly human. By the time I left that night, I felt a sense of resolution that surprised me. There was no need for grand declarations or dramatic gestures. We had reached a point of mutual understanding, where what existed between us could remain unspoken yet fully acknowledged. The bond we shared, fragile, beautiful, and quietly electric, was enough. It had changed me, reshaped my understanding of connection, and left me with a profound sense of gratitude. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I looked back at the softly lit windows and felt her gaze on me, though no words were exchanged. The warmth lingered, a promise that the connection we had forged would remain, regardless of what the future held. Whether we ever crossed the line into romance or remained the quiet companions of each other's lives, this bond, tender, deep, and irrevocably human, had already transformed us both. And in that lingering, wordless understanding, I realized something rare and beautiful. Sometimes, the most profound love isn't about possession or certainty. It's about recognition, respect, and the quiet joy of being seen, truly seen, by someone who matters more than words can ever capture. If this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more slow-burn romance tales. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt a connection you couldn't explain? We'd love to hear your stories.